This video is part of the chapter competition in the course Evolution of Plant Interactions at the Ostrava University. In the previous videos, we talked about the limitation of the Tillman resource ratio model and saw how relaxing these limitations one by one allows for the coexistence of multiple species with a limited number of resources. In this video, we will see what happens when we relax the assumption that the competing populations always reach an equilibrium. Up until now, we assume that regardless of whether the resources are homogeneously or heterogeneously distributed in space, once they reach equilibrium, they do not change because the resource consumption by the plants and the resource supply by the environment perfectly cancel each other out. Under these circumstances, the species that can tolerate lower levels of the resource for its growth will be the one that competitively eliminates the other. But what happens if the resource never reaches a complete equilibrium and instead fluctuates in time? This is a highly plausible scenario in natural habitats. For instance, water content in the soil can vary a lot depending on the precipitation levels. In this case, the resource abundance is not constant in time, but varies around the mean value that is close to the competitor's R star. If the non-competitive species was not fully eliminated from the habitat, it could then take advantage of these resource increases and increase its population size, and then decrease it in response to resource depletion. The resource and the blue population level never reach equilibrium, and thanks to this dynamic state, the two species competing for the same resource can be maintained in the habitat. The non-equilibrium hypothesis was experimentally tested in a phytoplankton community grown in two experimental environments. The phytoplankton composition was assessed at the beginning of the experiment, and then it was grown in two environments, one that had a constantly low levels of phosphorus and the other where phosphorus was added for 6 days. The community composition was regularly surveyed for an entire month. At the end of the month, in the control treatment, we see that the species which was originally dominant in the assembly, Gomosphaeria apomima, was replaced by another unicellular species, Navicula cryptocephala, which dominated the assembly after a month with constantly low phosphorus levels. This latter species has very low phosphorus requirement, so it is not surprising that when the environment was poor in phosphorus, it was the superior competitor. But when the culture was grown with pulses of phosphorus added every 6 days, its composition was radically different at the end of the month. There were 4 species that were relatively abundant, including the originally Navidula cryptocephala. So when the amount of phosphorus varies in time, several competing species can be maintained in the same habitat, which is a support in favor of the hypothesis of the effect of resources not reaching their equilibrium for the maintenance of multiple competing species.